Alright, so we're back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII. So, over a month ago, we did a video where we looked at a couple of FF7 Easter eggs within Elden Ring, and that video actually kind of inspired me to want to make a separate video where we look at other Final Fantasy VII references or Easter eggs in other games. As is pretty typical with me, I've yet to actually make that video, but it turns out today is Easter Sunday, so what better day to do an FF7 Easter egg related video? Anyways, before we hop into it, my initial plans of this video were to look up FF7 Easter eggs in other games outside of Square Enix. It's not Square Enix referencing their own works, similar to Elden Ring, of course. But I think we might throw some in there. I'm not entirely sure. An example I can give is like Xenogears. Within that game, there's a Tifa Lockhart poster. Xenogears being a game that came from Squaresoft a year after the release of Final Fantasy VII, but also within FF7, there's supposed to be a Xenogears Easter egg or reference, but as is typical with OG FF7, there was a mistranslation, and whenever Cloud's mumbling him a deal, he says Xenogaius instead of Xenogears. Also, another random Xenogears FF7 fact for you, the script for Xenogears was initially pitched for Final Fantasy VII, but was of course turned down and eventually became its own game. Another one we could pull from one of Square Enix's games is Final Fantasy XII whenever Gilgamesh pulls out the Buster Sword. I marked out so goddamn hard back in 06 when I seen this for the first time. Gilgamesh in the game actually has several weapons from previous Final Fantasy games before 12, like the revolver from 8, one of Zidon's Orichalcons from 9, and obviously the Brotherhood from 10. Everything about Gilgamesh in that game is fantastic, but I definitely love the references to like the previous Final Fantasy games that I'd played prior to 12 coming out. So we might mix some of the stuff like that into this video where we're pulling from other Squaresoft or Square Enix games. I don't entirely know. I don't know how much of those I'm going to use. I don't even know how long this video is going to be or how many Easter eggs I'm going to do. This video is kind of last minute. We might end up doing just every damn Easter egg that I can find. I don't know. Some of these might be kind of rapid fire as well because they're from games and other things that I just don't know anything about, have zero knowledge of, so I can't really talk about them. So we might just be going like crazy. I don't know. Lightning round or some shit. So first up, it's a smaller one, but it's worth mentioning. There are several games out there to allow you to create a character using Cloud's hairstyle, from Dynasty Warriors 8 Empires to Samurai Warriors 4-2s, maybe I say that, but also Samurai Warriors 4 Empires. There's actually several fighting games out there that allow you to create characters that look pretty damn similar to Cloud and Sephiroth, like Tekken 6, Soul Calibur 4, my personal favorite Soul Calibur, and also Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Anyways, enough of the character creation shit, let's get into some actual references and Easter eggs. In the original Hyperdimension Neptunia game, there's a character whose name is Zack Unfair, spelled slightly differently, which is an obvious parody of the character of Zack Fair from FF7. Also sticking with this series, in Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II, Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory, and Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 1, the character Neptune will occasionally hum the victory fanfare whenever she levels up. Also, the character Purple Heart has a victory pose that's very reminiscent of Cloud's from Final Fantasy VII. She doesn't do the sword spin, but it's the way she puts the sword behind her back.
Obvious victory. You were too weak to justify using this form.
In Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory, there's a quest called They're on the Move with a client whose name is One-Winged Angel. In Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory 2, there's a character whose name is Sasha, I think is how you say that shit, who's supposed to be some sort of a parody on Square Enix. For one, she often says, "I'm not interested," which is one of Cloud's famous quotes.
You're doing this for the planet, same as us. Not interested.
She's also a failed movie maker, which is, I guess, poking fun at The Spirits Within, which was honestly a pretty terrible movie, and then also has had a close encounter with death, which is a popular thing within the franchise. She also apparently has other lines from other characters in FF7 and the franchise as a whole, like Sephiroth and Squall, Lightning, Zack, Vanille, apparently. This character has several skills and abilities from the franchise, but specifically she has a version of Omnislash that for her is called Omnislice version S. If you're a fan of that franchise, more power to you, but I've never heard of it until today, and there's too many goddamn games and too many motherfucking references. I never want to see it again. In Terraria, there's a sword that very much resembles the Buster Sword called the Breaker Blade, which is a synonym for Buster Sword. In GTA 4, there's a TV show you can watch called Robot Princess Bubblegum that makes fun of a lot of different things, but they also poke fun at Final Fantasy. And there's a character whose name is Sword Boy that wields a very large sword. He has a moody demeanor, and he's meant to be poking fun at Cloud. But I absolutely love this because Grand Theft Auto 4 is by far my favorite Grand Theft Auto game, and I put an untold amount of hours into that and did not realize there's a Final Fantasy VII reference in it. That's just fantastic. In World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, there's a flower vendor in the city of Dalaran whose name is Aerith Primrose, and the character model looks pretty damn close to Aerith. In No More Heroes 2, Desperate Struggle, there's a character whose name is Skelter Helter, who's based off of Cloud Strife, both in appearance and hairstyle, but he also has a beam katana, which is called Buster Katana, again an obvious reference to Cloud. Also, his Buster Katana is multi-layered, which is a possible reference to Kadaj's sword from Avid Children, which was, of course, two-bladed. I don't know how likely that is, but it was on the site that I'm referencing, so I figured I'd mention it. In the game Eat led the return of Matt Hazard, there's a boss character whose name is Altos Stratus, who's a parody of both Cloud and Sephiroth, wields a large sword, but also vaguely looks like Sephiroth, and has a single wing on his left shoulder. But even his appearance aside, the main character actually states that he comes from the Penultimate Illusion series, a reference to Final Fantasy, of course, and he actually fights you through his own turn-based menus while you're fighting him in real time. Hopping back to Square Enix for a bit, in the game Star Ocean Till the End of Time, there's a character whose name is Amina that is dressed similar to Aerith, is also a flower girl, and again similar to Aerith, meets an unfortunate fate. In Parasite Eve, during one scene, you can see some official artwork from Yoshitaka Amano titled Tranquility of Cloud and Aerith. It's not the best quality here. I don't know if there's a better image out there. This is the only one I could find. And speaking of Parasite Eve, it has a somewhat similar relationship to FF7 as Xenogears, in that the early days of FF7, the ideas were for it to be this detective mystery in New York. That obviously got scrapped, and FF7 became what it is. But those scrapped ideas eventually turned into what Parasite Eve became, where you're a cop in New York, and obviously crazy shit happens. In Parasite Eve 2, there's a computer infected with a virus called Fate Keeper, but the antivirus is called Cloud, and it's actually found inside of a magazine called Eris. In The World Ends With You, which is a collaboration series with Jupiter and Square Enix, there's actually an item called Mako Synergy, which it doesn't use actual Mako energy, but obviously the name is a reference to FF7. In Tales of Symphonia, you can talk to an NPC in the slums of Mil Tokyo, who says that they heard about a cute flower girl that used to live there, but maybe it was just a rumor. An obvious reference to Aerith, of course. In the Simpsons game on the level Big Super Happy Fun Game, there's a flying boat at the end of the level that is similar in design to some of the airships seen throughout the series. Also, there's an evil corporation in the game called Renshaw, which is an obvious sort of flip of Shinra. In Fallout 2, the companion John Cassidy will sometimes in combat mention that he wishes he had a limit break, which Final Fantasy VII wasn't the first to introduce the idea of limit breaks. Final Fantasy VI also had powerful attacks you could do when taking damage, but of course 7 was the first to call it a limit break. In the game Enter the Gungeon, there's a gun named Machine Fist that very much resembles Barrett's gun arm, and actually its description is titled Avalanche of Bullets. And it says, according to legend, 2 men were each fitted with one of these hands, one the left and the other the right. The next time they met, only one walked away. So we got a Dying reference, my boys. In version 4.3 of Smite, they added a skin for the character Thanatos called Final Boss, which looks insanely like Sephiroth, and actually while it's equipped, he'll make references to One-Winged Angel and Genova. But my dudes, I think that'll just about do it for this video. I tried to find as many as I could and cram as many as I could into this video on such short notice, but I do gotta get the video made and processed and uploaded before the day actually ends, otherwise it kind of defeats the purpose. I know there's more references and Easter eggs out there. For one, within the Final Fantasy series itself, within Final Fantasy X game files, the Buster Sword exists, though it wasn't obviously in the final game. You also have a lot of like Final Fantasy VII related stuff within like Lightning Returns, as like DLC items, I think. You also have the Great Glacier Cola in Final Fantasy 15, but also Diamond Weapon was in Kingsglaive. And I know like Final Fantasy 14 has a lot of like bosses from Final Fantasy 7, like a lot of the weapon enemies and shit. So there's plenty out there, dude. There's probably a lot that I'm not aware of. Those are some that I am, and there's probably other references in other games that I just don't know about. If you guys know any, let me know. There's also like references and stuff like TV shows and movies, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But my dudes, that'll be pretty much the video. As many Easter eggs as I could find for Easter Sunday. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to if you guys only want to see more Final Fantasy VII Remake content, or I guess in this case just regular Final Fantasy VII content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter @YT. I'm a Discord. Links to are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine or leave it like Cobain.